Okay, we are live on Facebook. Hello, everybody. Hello. Thank you so much for being here today. We are so happy to see you. Thank you so much, Dom, for the great background music as we were coming in the room. And I want to welcome everybody to another day in the Daily Antidote of Song as we rapidly approach our 365th day of singing together and getting ready to move into our second year of singing together. Who would have ever believed this when we started, right? I want to welcome Dom Flemons in the room and Steve Winnick, our host for the day from the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. I want to thank Aaron Geyer and Katie Abadou for jointly operating our tech platform today. Thank you so much, gang. And I want to welcome everybody, the folks out on Facebook Live, hello, and everybody in this room. Deli, hello, nice to see you. Doug in Vermont. Nora, hi, great to have you back in here again. Nora sang with us once before, and we already know she's coming back. Arlene, thank you so much for being here today from California. Dennis from the Ubuntu Choir Network in British Columbia. Sheila in Florida, Alan in Maryland, Sue in California. Hello, Gay, nice to see you. Sarah in Texas, Dan in Virginia. Hello, Annette in California. Susan in Ohio, Karen in Utah. Hello, Birdie in Wisconsin or Michigan. I forget, I'm sorry. And Kathleen in Albuquerque, nice to see you. Rick and Mariana, nice to have you guys in here from Vermont. Rick Palieri, also one of our regular song leaders. Kathy in Virginia, hello. Susan, nice to see you. Renata in Wisconsin. Greg, nice to have you with us today. I think you might be new. Glad you joined us. Rick and Donna, also maybe new. Glad you've joined us today. Candace, hello. And Kay Calloway, Busy Graham, Carpe Diem Arts, Bonnie in Idaho. Brian, hello. Sandy in the Yukon, Mabel in Mass. Pete in Florida, glad you're back. Anne, nice to see you. Storm in Mass. Kevin in New Hampshire. Alex in Tokyo. Whoa, he's back. We haven't seen you in a while. We're so glad. We don't get to see Alex very much because it's like 2 a.m. where he is right now. We're so glad you've joined to see Dom. Hello, Jim in New York, Janet in Georgia, Suzanne, great to see you. Deborah in Kentucky, Lynn in Connecticut, Doreen and Carol and Janet and Peter in Toronto, Lisa in Indiana, Fred in Maryland, Tom in BC, Jane in Pennsylvania. Deep breath, everybody, because I need one. Barbara, it's great to see you, and Harriet in Chicago, and Gary and Christy in Mass, Carolyn in Idaho, Dion in Mass, and Jan in Illinois. Bob in Tucson, hello. Might be new to us today, I'm not sure. Martha in Oregon, hello. And to all the folks off video today, we are so glad you've joined us. So happy that we've got so many folks in the room ready to sing along with Dom. And I am just gonna say a few quick things. One, the lyrics will be in the chat for the fabulous song we're singing today. Please stick around for the post discussion because we're gonna have a lot of really great song discussion, more in-depth, more historical, because as part of the American Folklife Center Archive Challenge Week, we are lucky to have Steve Winnick, who is a folklorist and has a body of knowledge that is completely fabulous. And also my email is in the chat. If you are new to us, please be in touch. Let me know how you found us, where you're coming from, and whether or not you want to be on our Daily Antidote email list. Deep breath again, let's go. Steve, I am turning it over to you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joe. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Winnick. I am a Folklife specialist at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. And I want to welcome you all to our 4th day of our Archive Challenge partnership. It's our 3rd partnership week on the Daily Antidote of Song. So thanks for joining us, everyone. And we really want to thank Washington Revels and Carpe Diem Arts for hosting this fabulous program, the Daily Antidote of Song. And, you know, Joe mentioned my body of knowledge, but one of the great things about this crowd is that we're working with so many people with great bodies of knowledge, and that applies to Dom too, whom I'll talk about in a second. But I do have the privilege of working in the largest folklore archive in the US and possibly the largest in the world, certainly one of the largest in the world. And because I'm both an archive nerd and a musician myself, we love to find great songs and tunes, and we sometimes feel like, the kids in the candy store, right? Because we are there with all the stuff. And so we wanted others to have that experience too. And we had the idea of inviting artists directly to research our collections and find a song or tune that really inspires them, and then make their own version of that song, to interpret it or arrange it in their own way and add their own feeling to it. Really, what they get out of the song, they can then put back into it. And we called that program the Archive Challenge. And we've been running archive challenges since 2015, both at the Library of Congress and at folk music conferences. And now, during the pandemic, we're running them from home, and we call it the At-Home Archive Challenge. And we'll explain more about how you can participate in that after Dom sings his song. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Dom Flemons. So I mentioned that we've been doing this since 2015, and the very first iteration of this was at the Folk Alliance conference in that year. And we called it the Lomax Challenge because that was Alan Lomax's centennial year. And so we asked people to pick something specifically from his collections. And the very first person that we thought of, and the very first person that we asked, and the very first person who actually performed in the Archive Challenge was Dom Flemons. We'll explain a little afterward why we asked Dom specifically. But right now, I'll just say that Dom, of course, is known as the American Songster, and he's been using that moniker for some years now, and it refers to a particular tradition of African American performance, which he'll talk about. He is also well known for his work with the Carolina Chocolate Drops, for which he won a Grammy, and he's particularly known these days for a great project he did on Black Cowboys, which was also Grammy nominated. So he is one of the most prominent musicians working in this genre, taking traditional music and putting his own stamp on it. And we've known him for many years. I'm saying this, of course, on behalf of myself, but also my partner, Jennifer Cutting, who, by the way, is not here because she's getting her own daily antidote today. So that's very nice to know. So saying it on behalf of her as well. So this is our good friend, Dom Flemons, and he'll tell you about the song and sing it now.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be with you all at the Daily Anecdote of Song with the Library of Congress. It's always a pleasure to be able to go into the archives and reinterpret a few songs. This is one that I've realized I heard this song maybe about 20 years ago when I was going to college at Northern Arizona University. They had copies of all those old records that the Library of Congress issued. And this one, We Are Almost Down to the Shore, I started thinking about it just as, we've been in isolation and broadcasting from home. The sentiment around We Are Almost Down to the Shore just felt right. But let's go ahead and sing it a little bit first. This was sung with banjo originally, but I put a little guitar part together. So here's We Are Almost Down to the Shore. I'll show you a little bit of the chorus just so we can get started, because it's pretty easy. The verse and the chorus have the same call and response. So you sing, we are almost down to the shore. Let's try it one time. 1, 2, 3. We are almost down to the shore. One more time. 2, 3. We are almost down to the shore. Now that's basically it. And if we hit almost, the word almost as hard as we can, this song is just going to keep on barreling along. And so let's go ahead and get it. So here we go. We are almost down to the shore. Fight on, children, and don't turn back. Here you go. We are almost down to the shore. Let's get it one more time. Fight on, children, and don't turn back. We are almost down to the shore. Peter Peter out on the sea. Grab your nets and follow me. We are almost down to the shore. Moses died in the days of old. Where was he buried? Ain't never been told. We are almost down to the shore. Fight on, fight on, fight on, children, don't turn back. We are almost down to the shore. Fight on, children, and don't turn back. We are almost down to the shore. Fight on, six, fight on, six. Now God called Moses on the mountaintop. Praise the Lord, said Moses is high. We are almost down to the shore. His commandments in Moses' mind. Moses said, I'm going to leave my children behind. We are almost down to the shore. Fight on, fight on, fight on, children, and don't turn back. We are almost down to the shore. Keep on fighting. Fight on, fight on. Fight on, children, and don't turn back. Lead to the shore. We are almost down to the. Keep on going down, fighting. Fight on, children, and don't turn back. We are almost down to the shore.
Woo!
Okay.
Dom, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Absolutely loved it. And Steve Winnick, I'm turning it back.
Fantastic, Dom. That was so great. And everyone, let's give a silent round of applause for our friend Dom Flemons. So, Dom, what drew you to that song in particular from our collections?
Well, as I mentioned before, I heard the album Negro Religious Songs and Services in college, and that album has so many beautiful singing songs on it. Everything is just so singable, and we're almost down to the shore. Of course, it's a banjo number originally, so that drew me into it. But also, I just loved the melody and the chorus, and then I kind of modified it. It's a kind of a crooked number, but I put that little minor chord in there, and
right.
I thought that made a beautiful sort of little melodic switch. And so I was just drawn to the song again and again. And of course, the parable of Jesus and the disciple Peter in the New Testament juxtaposed next to the story of Moses in the Exodus in the Old Testament. I thought that was also an interesting lyric to have in there, especially especially his commandment in Moses' mind, and Moses said, I'm going to leave my children behind, is such an interesting phrase, and how it's written is very beautiful. So I was drawn to it that way.
Yeah, it's really poignant because it's about, Moses leading his people out of slavery, but he doesn't make it with them to the final destination, and that not everybody is gonna make it to that final destination, but the effort, the struggle continues through the generations, no matter who continues. So it's a great lyric. and as you say, just a fantastic version. And thanks for adding that minor chord too. It does add just a little more power to the music of it. So you mentioned the LP, Negro Religious Songs and Services, and I'll just clarify for everyone that the archive of folk song at the Library of Congress, which is now the American Folklife Center archive, but existed before the American Folklife Center itself did, used to release albums on LP of our materials, and these LPs made it all over the world into libraries everywhere and had a great effect on American folk music. And Dom is one of the people who actually found some of those LPs while he was in school, in high school and college, and started to listen to our material that way. So he discovered the archive actually through these LPs released in libraries. Could you talk a little about that, Dom?
Oh, sure thing. Well, you know, being born in 1982, I guess it was around 2000 that I began to start really delving into folk music as a form. And I really got interested in the folk revival of people like Bob Dylan, Dave Van Ronk, Brownie McGee and Sonny Terry, but also Eric Von Schmidt. And I heard his song, Wasn't That a Mighty Storm, and which is also on Negro Religious Songs and Services. And
right.
I was drawn to just the old time material, finding the oldest songs that I could find, and even so much so my record collecting habits have gotten to where I actually have one of the big 78s that the library reissued from the recording laboratory, and this has both We Are Almost Down to the Shore and Shines Like a Star in the Morning from Joe Lee, which is another one I like to sing.
Yeah.
But it connected me with a lot of early performance styles, because of course a song like We Are Almost Down to the Shore and those types of spirituals would be adapted into the civil rights movement and would be adapted to fit the struggles of the current times. And of course I thought about it when doing the song for the Daily Anecdote. So many people are reaching as far as they can in the course of this pandemic, and I just, that sentiment really resonated with me as well. And I just the forethought put into these recordings that people like John Lomax, of course, who was one of the main curators on that series, he really just really was very succinct and was very mindful of what the songs would mean in the future. And I find that they still hold up in many ways.
Yeah, I agree with that. They're such great material. And you know, what we really love, as I've said, is to get them into the hands of people who'll do something with them, like Dom. And I have something kind of fun to show everyone. So we mentioned that Dom's been working with the material from our archive for a while. And we've got a picture here of Dom. This is Dom in the archive. I took this picture, and this picture was taken in 2007. So it's 14 years ago now. Hard to believe, isn't it? And it's kind of a poignant photo for me, because I go to that room every day when I work at the library, but I have not been there in over a year now because of the pandemic. So this week was the week that we stopped going in, I believe. So it's just the anniversary of my not going into that room, which is very strange, but we'll be back. We all know that we'll be back. So, you know, we just thought we were leaving for a couple of weeks or something. Oh, you know, it's really strange to see it there without us. But so Dom was at that time with the Carolina Chocolate Drops, and that's Justin's other arm. You know, the other arm you see is Justin from that group as well. So, yeah, so that's how long we've known Dom as a researcher in the archive. But as I said, through these old LPs, he's been listening to our music since even long before that. And so we thought we would give a listen to the field recording, to a little snippet of that field recording, and hear what it sounded like when Jimmy Struthers did it. Yeah, there we go. That's the 78 version. Yeah.
Fight on, children, and don't turn back. We are almost down turn back. We are almost down to the shore. Fish and Peter on the sea.
All right. So that was the beginning of the field recorded version, and that was recorded by John Lomax, and the performer was Jimmy Struthers, and we've got a picture of him as well, and that's Joe Lee, the other man in the picture with Jimmy Struthers, and you see some folks looking out the window at them too, which is kind of a weird framing, but that's how it was on that day. So Jimmy Struthers is the man who's in profile with the guitar, and he was blind, and that's a photo of what the performer looked like who was singing that song on the recording. So you know, we got a couple of people in the room that we thought we'd bring into this process of talking to Dom. So we wonder whether Rick Polari has got maybe a question or a comment to make on Dom's, you know, to ask Dom a question about this.
Sure, Dom. One of the things,
Rick.
it's good to see you.
Rick is another one of those people I mentioned who's got a huge body of knowledge about this stuff. So it's great to have an assist here from Rick.
And also, Rick was the first guy to interview me for the Library of Congress back in 1998.
That's right, because we got his interview. That's right.
Yeah. You know, Dom, I'm wondering, you know, because the 5-string banjo is quite popular, and you chose to play the 4-string banjo in an unusual style in your performances. And I was wondering what made you choose that? And was that a traditional style that you found, or did you kind of take some roots and add to it to make it your own style?
Well, ultimately, I added on to it to make it my own style. But people like Jimmy Struthers were actually excellent, you know, foundation for my interpretation of African American banjo music at the time. Of course, I started out listening to Flatt and Scruggs, and my first banjo I got was actually a loan from a friend, and the friend didn't like the little 5-string on the top, so I learned with the 4 long strings. So I first learned in open G tuning with the long strings. Since I started out playing guitar and I had been into country blues and open tuning on the guitar before playing the banjo, I saw a connection between those two things. So I just started translating guitar licks onto the banjo and vice versa. So that was where it started. But there were people like Gus Cannon, Jimmy Struthers was a great musician, and Doc Boggs, Clarence Ashley. Some of the banjo players that sort of veered off into a bluesier direction always drew me in. And even with doing the Jimmy Struthers number, I sort of translated the banjo part as I could hear it on the field recording into something that was more aligned with something that someone like John Jackson or one of the Carolina or Virginia blues players might have done to one of the banjo numbers or something like that when played on the guitar. So it was, it's been sort of a mishmash, but a mishmash as much as there are field recordings in the world. That's kind of where I landed on it, you know.
Well, it's an unusual style. Like I said, most people will play a 5-string banjo. When they play a 4-string, a 4-string plectrum banjo is not something that you often see performers with. And the way that you play it is very unusual because you use mainly your thumb, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I would probably have to blame all the banjo players in Phoenix that I learned from early on, from everybody from Bob Sandstead to Lon Austin, even Fred Kuhn, whose clawhammer style from West Virginia led with the thumb. I think about those things often. I got to see a lot of different banjo players playing, so there was never really a one set of rules to the banjo, even from the first moments I started to play. So that was also something too. But you know, I've never tried to stay fully. I've never tried to recreate songs 100% if I found there was a better idea along the way. And I feel like that's the folk process in a certain way, is that, I don't know, a certain little lick here and there. That shows that we're in the 21st century, you know.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, John.
You know, another thing that sometimes confounds us as the curators of these collections is the 6-string banjo, because that was starting to come in the early part of the century. And sometimes when you hear a recording, particularly these old field recordings on these discs or even cylinders, you can't really tell if it's a guitar or a banjo. You know, it sound, you know, the sound quality is such that you're hearing something, and so you might be able to discern the tuning, but that doesn't really tell you the answer, you know. And sometimes you have to look at the, you know, any pictures that survive of the musicians and look at the headstock. You know, there's all kinds of ways of figuring this out. But yeah, the you know, 3 different sort of genres of banjo can be confusing sometimes. So thanks for that banjo question, Rick. That was great.
Well, funny enough, Stephen, there's been a lot of debate over if Jimmy Struthers is playing a 4-string or a 5-string banjo on his recordings. And unfortunately, there's only one recording, his version of Cripple Creek, that would give any impression that he's playing 5 strings, because you can hear the string on the top. But any of the other songs, it would sound like he's just playing a plectrum banjo, which is again another fascinating.
Yeah, it's
pictures, you know.
It's hard to know, and of course, you know, you don't even know if the person might have had both instruments, and you know, and it could be different instruments on different recordings. There's just no way to be sure unless the field worker was very precise about writing stuff down, which is why now we try to do that. But back in those days, it wasn't always, they didn't really, they thought about the importance of the music in the future, as you said, but they didn't necessarily think about, well, you know, what should I write down about this session so that in the future, when people are listening to this, they can interpret it fully. You know, it's not, it took a while before people who were doing audio documentation realized that they needed to put some more, they just thought they'd remember it when anyone asked them, you know. So it's kind of funny that we don't always have complete notes about sessions like this. So I see my friend Nora Rhodes is here as well, and I wondered if she had a question she might want to ask Dom.
Yes, it's great to see you, Dom, and of course it's also great to see you, Steve.
Hi, Nora.
Hi.
Nora?
Yeah, I suppose that my question would have to do with archival research. And so I suppose I was wondering, when you are conducting research in the archives, if you look much at paper materials as well as audio or visual, and also if so, if that has a different impact on your understanding of the music or what you take away.
Oh, absolutely. For me, finding any information at all about any particular artist or a song, there was a fellow named Greg Kimball who's actually doing a lot of work on Jimmy Struthers. I'm glad that Greg was able to join us. He even mentioned with We're Almost Down to the Shore, he mentioned an earlier source for the song, which I'll look up afterward just so I can see what they say about it. Sometimes it's very interesting to see what people in their contemporary place say about any given song at any given time. I continue to stress to people that we're currently in a moment where 21st century folklore scholarship is running head on with 19th century folklore scholarship in terms of there are certain discrepancies with the ways that people were handling material. Sometimes they had different terminology and ways they thought about things. Even Negro religious songs and services is a very outdated name for a folklore album on African American music, but you know, it's a symbol of its time. But at the same moment, to read the liner notes that are within it is actually quite a revelation. There's some great insights that John Lomax places into the context for each of the songs, including the evolution of spiritual music going from being the old lined out hymns going into more jazzy spiritual music, as with Bosie Sturtevant's Ain't No Grave Gonna Hold My Body Down. So there's it's very insightful to be able to find as many source documents as you can. You know, sometimes it's you can find some surprises in there that you as a modern person may not have thought to find. And then other times there are details that the original folklorists might have skipped over. And that is something as well that I always stress to people, is that sometimes some of the material has only been looked at once, maybe twice. And with many decades and years separated from the original projects, there are insights that we can always find when delving into the archives. That's why I went straight to the Library of Congress. I mean, one of the things that I asked Stephen about was bones players in the Library of Congress. And one of my favorite recordings that we came across was a cowboy band that just had a bones player that was playing a waltz, of all things, not in 4/4, but a waltz. And just this beautiful recording, and it was out in just right out in the field. It was really beautiful. And of course, it was backed with a recording of a guy calling his dogs out, and he called a whole series of dogs into the yard. And that was interesting in of itself.
Yeah, we did a whole radio show on the Bob Edwards show once about people doing animal calls in the archive, which is a whole genre that we have. But yeah, and like you say, the different instruments that people played, having bones and spoons and all of the percussion instruments and everything, and you do sometimes have to consult the paper, whatever manuscripts there are, whatever the folks wrote down, and even our card catalog has got generations of commentary on it sometimes. Joe Hickerson would write a correction on the card for something, and so you have these layers, and it's really interesting to do that kind of historical research. And Dom mentioned the title of the LP. You can sort of excavate the layers of history by looking at the different re-releases of the library's materials, right? And those old 78 albums, albums are called albums because they were originally albums of 78s. You get like 5 to 10 78s in a little booklet that you would open up and flip, right? And that's why a long playing record is called an album. So we originally released these things as literal albums, and then we released them on LP, and then in some cases we released them on CD, and the titles would change. So something that had Negro in the title in the 1940s would have Afro-American in the title sometimes in the 1980s through the early 2000s. And then it changed to African-American after that, because the polite way of referring to people just changed over time. And so that's something, that's interesting to follow as well. All kinds of context about the history of the world is coming into the way in which we view these old field recordings. So I see that that there's some questions in the chat, which I'll ask Dom. So one of them actually relates to that picture that shows Joe Lee and Jimmy Struthers together, because they played and sang together sometimes. And Greg Kimball asks that Joe Lee beat straws on Struthers' guitar during their duo performances. Have you seen other references to this on guitar? Because there are plenty. This is a fiddle technique usually. So have you seen that before, Dom?
I haven't myself, and that was what struck me when I first began to. First, I just noticed the photo, but then when I started to see that he was beating sticks against it, that's the only time I've ever seen that done with the guitar. But
yeah, so I'll just explain what that is. I realize a lot of people won't know. So beating straws or beating sticks is when you take light sticks and you actually hit the strings of an instrument while another player is playing them. So it's sort of like you're playing a little hammered dulcimer on the fingerboard of the fiddle or guitar while the other person's playing the instrument. And it's a technique for getting extra harmony and rhythm out of the instrument so two people are playing it at the same time. So yeah, so that's a great observation about their duo performance as well. And so I'm looking. So if anyone else sees comments in the chat or questions in the chat, Joe, if you can refer them to me. I'm looking through it, but there's a lot in here, of course. Yeah, a few folks asked what the lyrics might mean. We're almost down to the shore, and I think you can interpret that in a number of ways, but of course Moses led the children of Israel through the Red Sea, so there's that shore is a possibility, and then the River Jordan is always in spirituals. So essentially, I think it's a reference to the Promised Land, to freedom. Is that what you think about it, Dom? Was that your interpretation?
Yeah, that was my interpretation as well. There's a sense of moving forward into freedom, and the shore, I think, is referring into the Old Testament sense, I think, with Moses taking the children to the Red Sea. But at the same time, as I mentioned before, these songs have been adapted to where at first I was thinking in my interpretation to throw in a couple of other verses, because a lot of
Right.
these types of spirituals are kind of the catch-all, catch-all spirituals that you can throw in any number of verses, whether it be like "Oh Mary, Don't You Weep's" verses,
Right.
or "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." Those are songs that tend to have just a call and response chorus with and you can direct the audience in certain ways. And I would wonder also if Jimmy Struthers sang the verses the same way every time, or if he interjected other verses to serve whatever purpose it might be, because that's also a thing too. When you get deep into some of the field recordings, some of the religious songs are directed at John Lomax.
Mm-hmm.
they crafted the narrative pointing at the folklorists themselves, so that could be something too. But yeah, I would just say there's a general moving from a place you don't want to be to a new place, which I think for a guy like Jimmy Struthers, I think he was in the in the state penitentiary over in Richmond.
In Richmond, I believe. Yeah.
I'd imagine he'd want to get back to wherever he was before that. So there's also almost like a song like the Midnight Special, a sense of wishing to move back to a better place, whatever the better place may be.
Right. Yeah, it's a great point that, there's things that a single field recording can tell us, and there's things that it can't tell us, right? So it tells us how someone sang the song on one occasion in one place and time, but it doesn't necessarily tell us that they always sang the song that way. And sometimes if you have more than one field recording of the same person singing the same song, you find that they don't sing the song the same way every time, that sometimes there's a lot more verses, sometimes there are different verses. And that's another great point, that for most field recordings, I would say we only have one field recording of the person singing that song. And so what we can say about it is somewhat limited by that fact, but sometimes we have more data that we can compare. And Dom's done a lot of that kind of work, listening to all the versions that we have of certain individuals for that reason. So I see another important question, I think, in the chat, which is, Dom, if you could talk a little bit about your Black Cowboys project. I know it's close to your heart, so.
Oh, of course. Yeah, the Black Cowboys, that started out as a means to, and by the way, Greg Kimball wrote in that he was at the state prison farm in Goochland County. So that was where Jimmy Struthers.
Gotcha.
Yeah, with the Black Cowboys, that started several years back when I was actually looking to find out more about my roots in Arizona. I came across a book called The Negro Cowboys in the Painted Desert, and that started this journey for me to find any reference I could to African-American cowboys, because the book put the idea out that 1 in 4 cowboys that helped settle the West were African-American, working alongside the Mexican vaqueros and the Native American cowboys and the Anglo cowboys. And being a fan of cowboy music in general, I started to dissect a lot of the cowboy music that I had known, to find stories, or also to find interesting songs that would help tell a little bit of the story of westward migration for African Americans in an earlier period than the Great Migration that we tend to think of the 30s and the 1930s and 40s. This is now in the, let's say, the late 1860s going into the 1890s, leading into 1900. You find many different people that are coming out of slavery. They're having their own independent wages, and many of them are moving out west, and they're starting to find their own homestead, lands, plains, work, any type of new life from the old life they once knew. Again, we are almost down to the shore is a very telling of this sort of movement that is continuously happening within the African American community. And so Black Cowboys, I just started to meditate on that idea, and I found that Black Western culture included not only cowboys, but settlers, homesteaders. It included African Americans who had moved over with Native American tribes in time of the Trail of Tears and afterward. It also told the story of folks moving out west and building a brand new life, like my grandparents ended up doing. they ended up settling in Flagstaff, working at the sawmill. And so that was sort of a story that I found. The Buffalo Soldiers are also wrapped in this bigger story. And so I just started collecting stories as I went. And I wanted to make something that would be somewhat comprehensive for the idea of Black cowboys and Black Western people if folks might not have heard about it. And I grabbed some of the well-known stories, that of someone like Bass Reeves, who was the first African-American Deputy U.S. Marshal of the United States, Nat Love, who was a Black cowboy who had written his own autobiography, and then also Bill Pickett, who was one of the major African-American rodeo riders to make a name for himself here and across the world and in Mexico. And so I brought all those things together, and it was a beautiful moment, you know, even to bring Leadbelly and some of the old time songsters from East Texas, Leadbelly, Mance Lipscomb, and Henry Ragtime Texas Thomas. And then, of course, I'll give a shout out to Stephen Wade's book, The Beautiful Music All Around Us, for giving me a lot of information about Jess Morris, who did the song Goodbye Old Paint. And that also has its own story associated with Black cowboys interacting with white cowboys and musical interchange. And so so that's sort of the basic part of it, but
yeah,
I wrote out 40 pages to make
right.
it.
Yeah, it's a great project. It's on Smithsonian Folkways. It's a CD with a extensive liner notes written by Dom, and you know, we totally recommend it. It's a great piece of work. So thanks for working on that and for explaining it so well here, Dom. That's fantastic. And I think we're getting to the point where we're going to ask you to sing the song one more time or part of it. But before we do that, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank you know, my co-conspirators here, Nora Rhodes, who herself is a great singer and banjo player as well, and has led us here in the Daily Antidote of Song, and Rick Polari, who's a regular song leader here and also a great banjo player. Everybody plays the banjo today, except Dom's got his guitar today, but he does play the banjo really well. So Dom is going to take us out again with whatever part of the song you want to sing. You could do the whole thing, or you could do just a couple of verses. It's up to you. So.
Okay, well, let me see. Let's fight on, children, don't turn back. We almost down to the shore. Fight on, children, and don't turn back. We almost down to the shore. Now, Peter, out on the sea, grab your nets and follow me. We almost down to the shore. His commandments in Moses' mind, Moses, I'm gonna leave my children behind. We almost down to the shore. Fight on, children, and don't turn back. We almost down to the shore. One more. Fight on, children, and don't turn back. We almost down to the shore.
Woo! Don Flemons, thank you so much. What an incredible journey through some great music and some great history. Thank you so much for being here and for playing for us and with us. We loved singing with you. Let's all give Dom another big hand, please. Yay! The silent applause. And also thank you so much to Steve Winnick, accompanied by the dancing Figgy.
Figgy the archive cat is here. You know, back in the old days, they used to have cats in archives because there was no other way to control, you know, pests that would eat the books. But nowadays at the library, we have better methods than that. So Figgy stays home.
That's great. Well, we're glad Figgy could be here to dance along with us today. That was great. Thank you so much for the fabulous hosting, Steve. And thanks again to Dom. I do want to shout out all of the folks in this room who in some way or another have decided on their life's journey to at least pretend to be ethnomusicologists or folklorists, or who knows, maybe we actually have some other folks in the room who really are. But in particular, Greg Kimball was filling the chat up with some really great stuff. And also Kathy in Virginia, finding the LP, I think, available online for $902 in case anybody still wants to buy it. But then also then stuck something in that there's something else available for $20 somewhere else. So please do check it out. There you go. Dom, hang on to that.
Yeah.
And thanks also for all the other great questions. We're sorry if we didn't get to something that you said, but we will send the chat to Dom and to Steve afterwards. So we really are grateful for all that amazing participation. Just for kicks, let's all thank ourselves. Woohoo! Yeah, with the kind of enthusiasm, we will thank Dom in another second. And again to Dom, thank you. And again to Steve. What a great, great day in our Archive Challenge week. So grateful that you all were here. Can't wait to see you tomorrow and the next few days for some more Archive Challenge singing. And for now, we say goodbye. Aaron and Katie, thank you again so much for all that great tech help.
I'd like to thank Joe and Aaron and Katie and Washington Revels and Carpe Diem Arts and the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress for employing me and letting me be here and do this. And of course, Dom Flemons, one of our favorite musicians, and as I said, the very first Archive Challenge performer, and now the very latest Archive Challenge performer as well. So thanks so much, Dom.
Oh yeah, it's a pleasure to be able to present AAFS 46B.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you again, gang. That was super fun. We're going to say goodbye to everybody out there on Facebook Live. Thanks so much for joining, and we can't wait to see you tomorrow.